The Arctic was unforgiving, an endless expanse of ice and howling winds. A routine satellite scan picked up something unusual, a massive, unnatural shape buried beneath the frozen wasteland. At first, experts assumed it was just another wreck, a relic from the Cold War, or an abandoned research station. But when a specialized expedition team arrived at the location, they realized it was something far more shocking. An entire passenger plane, perfectly preserved in the ice, as if frozen in time. There were no flight records matching its description. No distress signals had ever been logged. It was as if the aircraft had never existed. The real horror began when they finally managed to pry open the frozen doors. As the expedition team forced the frozen doors open, a gust of icy air escaped, carrying an unsettling stillness. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing a sight that made their blood run cold. The interior of the plane was eerily intact, seats upright, luggage stored away, trays still locked in position. It looked as if the passengers had been frozen mid-flight. But the real horror, there were no bodies. Not a single soul on board. No skeletal remains, no signs of struggle, just an abandoned aircraft, perfectly preserved, as if its passengers had vanished into thin air. The crew's unease deepened as they reached the cockpit, where they found the pilot's log still open, frozen on the last entry. The message scribbled on the page was barely legible, but one line stood out, sending a wave of dread through the team. "They're outside. We shouldn't have answered." Shaken by the chilling message in the pilot's log, the expedition team pressed on, searching for any hint of what had happened. The controls in the cockpit were frozen mid-operation, suggesting the pilot had been trying to send a distress signal before everything stopped. But there was no record of a distress call ever reaching the outside world. Then they found something even stranger. The plane's emergency exit had been forced open from the inside. The metal around the doorframe was bent outward, as if someone or something had been desperate to escape. Near the open hatch, a trail of deep, claw-like scratches marred the floor, leading to the exit and disappearing into the snowy abyss. It was as if the passengers had fled into the freezing wasteland, but how could they have survived? The team's geologist, inspecting the ice around the wreckage, noticed something alarming. The snow was undisturbed. No footprints, no drag marks, nothing to suggest anyone had ever left the plane. It was as if the passengers had simply vanished into thin air. What could have caused this? And what's waiting outside the plane? Determined to uncover more, the team moved cautiously toward the back of the plane, where the cargo hold remained sealed under layers of frost. It took them several minutes to force the frozen latch open, and as the heavy door creaked ajar, a blast of ice-cold air rushed out, as if something inside had been waiting to be released. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing rows of unmarked crates, each coated in thick layers of ice. Some had military-style markings, but the labels were faded beyond recognition. The eerie silence inside the hold made every movement feel deafening. Then, one of the team members gasped. At the far end of the cargo bay, several human-shaped figures were frozen solid, huddled together as if trying to protect themselves from something. Their faces were twisted in expressions of sheer terror, eyes wide open, their skin covered in a thin layer of frost. But what sent a chill down everyone's spine wasn't just their horrifying expressions, it was their uniforms. These people weren't from the 1950s. Their clothing looked far too modern. Somehow they shouldn't have been on this plane at all. What happened to them? And why were they here? One of the team members, still shaken by the frozen bodies, noticed something clutched tightly in the hands of one of the figures, a leather-bound journal covered in frost. With careful precision, they pried it free, the frozen fingers cracking as they loosened their grip. The cover was aged, yet somehow intact, and as they flipped through the pages, the handwriting inside wasn't from the 1950s, it was modern. The dates in the entries? Less than 2 years ago. The journal described a secret mission, a group sent to retrieve something from the wreckage, but they never made it out. The last entries became frantic, almost unreadable, mentioning, "Something is still alive. It watches us from the dark. If you find this, don't open the last crate." The team exchanged uneasy glances. They scanned the cargo hold once more, their flashlights trembling slightly. Then, in the farthest corner, hidden beneath layers of ice and debris, they saw it, a crate unlike the others. It was bigger, reinforced with steel, and covered in warning symbols. The latch was broken, as if something had forced its way out. And then, they heard it. A faint scratching noise. What was inside that crate? And was it still here? The team froze. The scratching noise wasn't just in their heads. It was real. And it was getting louder. One of the scientists, trembling, aimed his flashlight at the crate. The steel reinforcement was bent outward, as if something had clawed its way out from the inside. The warning symbols on the side were faded but still visible. Biohazard, radiation, and something else, an unknown symbol they didn't recognize. Then bang. The crate lurched forward slightly, as if something had just moved inside it. "There's no way," one of the team members whispered. "This thing has been frozen for decades." Another scientist reached out, hesitating, then brushed the frost off the side of the crate. That's when they saw it, scratch marks running along the edges, deep and uneven, as if whatever was inside had fought desperately to break free. The journal's words echoed in their minds. "If you find this, don't open the last crate." One of them backed away. "We should leave now." But the expedition leader wasn't convinced. "We need to know what's inside," he said. "If this is some kind of biological experiment, we have to document it." With a deep breath, he reached for the partially broken latch. And then the crate moved again. This time, something thumped from inside. Something alive. The entire team took a step back as another heavy thump echoed from inside the crate. The ice-covered metal rattled, dusting the air with frost. No way," one of the scientists stammered. "That thing should be dead." The expedition leader hesitated, but his curiosity got the better of him. With a trembling hand, he reached for the latch. Click. The old metal creaked as the latch came loose. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, bang. The crate burst open, sending a cloud of ice and dust into the air. The team staggered backward, coughing, their vision blurred. But through the swirling frost, they saw it. A figure, a humanoid, but not quite human. It stood unnaturally tall, its limbs too long, its skin pale and almost translucent under the dim Arctic light. Its eyes, sunken, black voids, locked onto them. Then it breathed in, a deep, ragged inhale, as if tasting the air for the first time in decades. The silence was suffocating. Then it moved, and the screaming began. The creature lunged forward with terrifying speed, its elongated limbs unnaturally fluid, as if it had just woken from centuries of slumber. The lead scientist barely had time to react before it gripped his arm with icy fingers. A piercing scream tore through the frozen air. The others scrambled backward, their boots slipping on the frost-covered metal. "Run!" someone shouted, but panic had already overtaken reason. The creature's black, hollow eyes flickered with something ancient, something hungry. It tilted its head, almost as if studying the terrified humans before it. Then, with a sickening crack, it twisted the scientist's arm at an unnatural angle. His scream was cut short. A soldier raised his rifle, his hand shaking. "Stand down. We will shoot." But the creature smiled. A grotesque, unnatural curl of the lips that sent an ice-cold terror through everyone's veins. Then it spoke. Not in words, but in a sound, a deep guttural hum that resonated through the ice itself. The walls of the cavern trembled, and from deep below, something answered. The ground shuddered. The ice beneath their feet cracked open. And the team realized they weren't alone. The ground continued to shudder, and the ice cracked wider beneath their feet. The terrifying hum that the creature had made was now joined by another eerie noise, a distant, echoing growl. Panic surged among the expedition team as they scrambled for safety, but the creature, its eyes never leaving them, seemed to be in no hurry. It slowly turned, like it was waiting for something. That's when they heard it. The sound of something moving below them, deep within the frozen earth. Massive, unearthly movements that made the ground itself tremble. "What have we unleashed?" someone whispered, eyes wide with terror. Then, as the creature raised its head once more, the truth became clear. The creature wasn't the only one. The frozen plain had been just a small part of a much larger mystery. There were others buried in the ice, deep beneath the surface, more bodies, more creatures, all encased in the ancient frost for centuries. This was no mere crash site. This was a graveyard. And they were no longer alone. The team's horror turned to pure survival instinct as the ground split open and dozens of dark figures, some humanoid, some inhuman, began to emerge from the ice. It became clear now. These weren't just frozen bodies. These were ancient beings, and they weren't going to let anyone leave alive.